So one of the things we want to actually just start talking about is, what do we mean by fidelity? So so let's just start off with a couple of folks' ideas. When we hear the word fidelity, fidelity, it looks like it's being sounded out like that.
It's something like that, yes.
What are some things that you all think about when you hear the word fidelity?
Well, you can either put it in the chat or you can popcorn it out if you would like.
Mm-hmm. Hello, folks that are in the chat.
So Angel has got something in the chat here.
Ooh.
Trust.
Faithful.
Trust. Insurance.
Oh, I like that.
And we've got Lydia talking about true, the idea
Mm-hmm.
of something being true. Defining
yes.
From Robin in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Stability, true. Yes.
Okay.
I like this. This is like Wordle.
It's like yeah. No. These are great. So consistency is another word that is showing up here in the chat. Okay. Mm-hmm. So a couple of people have got this idea of true being in there, mm-hmm. and the insurance piece. I'm wondering actually, Dr. Davis, if you could just speak to that a little bit more. I'm intrigued. I mean, I think I have a sense of where you might be coming from or going with that. But can you just speak to that a little bit more?
Hi everyone. I just thinking about Fidelity Insurance. That's
like literally the insurance company.
Literally meaning the insurance company. That was just the first thing that popped up in my head.
All right. That is great. I love it.
I'm thinking of the opposite of fidelity, as in infidelity in a spouse.
Oh,
all right.
Well, it's an afternoon, friends.
Yeah, we are definitely taking this word association for all that we can.
Yes.
That's cool. Certainly.
Well, I think it's interesting that an insurance company would call themselves Fidelity because of all the words that you've all generated here. The defining, the consistency, stability, and also infidelity being the opposite of that. The instability, inconsistency, something that's not defined, ill-defined, untrue. So I think all of those are really a good starting place for what we mean, because we do throw this word around with this tool all the time, fidelity and fidelity to the curriculum.
It always makes me think of the Marines, actually. Any people from the family members and the Marines? Yeah, no, it's Semper Fi from the Marines. It's the motto of the Marines. It means always faithful. Yeah, right.
Sounds good.
So
let's see what does the dictionary say. Oh, yes. Well, I like, although this strict observance of promises, duties, etc. That sounds very Marine. Loyalty, adherence to fact or detail, accuracy. So a lot of the things that folks generated, and then we'll also see this in this tool. So yes, so we have a lot of definitions, shared definitions already about what we mean for fidelity.
Yes.
In terms of in relationship to the curriculum and this project, even more specifically, it helps us know how we're doing as an organization or project. You have a very wide scope of classrooms and programs, but in terms of the overall goals of your project, how are we doing overall? How do we know that how do we know that we're using the approach we intended, right? All of this is very much a hypothesis. This is what we know worked. Even in Boston, we had this hypothesis. If we had this shared curriculum, we would have these sorts of outcomes. And so now we are, again, and we found out from using this fidelity tool that the approach that we hypothesized was working, and how much of it was being used. Probably most importantly to me as a coach is, how will we know which areas need improvement? And again, you'll see the magnitude of this fidelity tool, and for me, knowing that I have a certain amount of visits or contact points with teachers, I want to maximize that time and know specifically what I'm going to be working on with them. And sort of related to that, how do we know that we're on the right track? Do we need to pivot? I mean, certainly some of the results of when we've done Fidelity have implicated changes or revisions to our curriculum. So yeah, it gives us a lot of information beyond even sort of the classroom take. So we hope you will find it helpful to you going forward in your project as well, similarly. Okay, so what are those? What does the Fidelity tool measure? Clearly adherence to the curriculum. And one thing obviously to really be mindful of is that, or something that should be implicit, is that it's not just to Unit 5, Week 2, Tuesday at 10 o'clock, but probably more importantly are the practices and the principles of the curriculum. And again, this is just a quick reminder of what those are. And you will see, we're going to look specifically at the practices and the components, the two inner circles. And you'll see both in adherence and quality items, those practices implicit to the way those questions are asked.
And the reason, again, why it's sort of oriented towards these things is because research that we have done on the curriculum has demonstrated that it is the practices that are the key levers in driving the change, driving the progress that we want to see happening with children. That's the $50 million point. These practices here. As Abby said, it's not so much a question of being on this day of this unit at this particular point in time, but whether or not these practices are happening
and consistently happening.
Correct.
So next slide. So we use the tool in many ways around a data cycle, and our data folks here will probably be very chime in here about sort of the beauty of data. In that you really, using data for continuous quality improvement is really sort of at the heart of this cycle. We're going to obviously talk about the multiple uses for the tool, all from the classroom level, working directly with the teacher, school level, assessing sort of all of your classrooms, all the way up to this project level. What's really, a couple of things that I think are really important about this data cycle, transparency. We really found that transparency, using the tool, sharing the tool with teachers, really is key for transformation, because it really, there isn't any secret as to what it is that we're looking at. There's no secret as to what the quality, the nuances of all the sort of quality items are. And we find that on the training step, it really is helpful, if not sharing the entire tool with teachers, sharing the language so that they really start to internalize those quality elements. And also that the closer those steps of collection, reflection, and planning happen, the more efficient it is for, or the more quickly the turnover of progress happens. And it's also more impactful for children if those pieces can happen close together. So before we dive in, we just want to talk about a few sort of pieces that you'll see throughout the tools. But they occur in all of the components. So we're just going to kind of bookmark these and kind of define these a little bit. So there are two different types of items in the tool. One is adherence items, and they're at the top of every component that you'll be observing. And those are yes, no, or times, where you'll be time stamping when you started the observation for that particular item, for that particular component and when you end. So it's just straightforward yes, no.
And by yes, no, we're simply referring to essentially, is the teacher doing this or is the teacher not doing this?
Yes.
Mhm.
And then the bulk of the rest of the tool are quality scale items, 1 to 5. And as we'll see, it's very clear what constitutes a 1, what constitutes a 5, a 3, etc. Oftentimes the 2s and the 4s may be blank because that's the sort of, to me, the Goldilocks range where it's like, it's a little bit 5, it's a little bit 3, I'm going to give it a 4. So you'll see that in this tool that sometimes I usually land in the 2, 3, the 2, 4, because sometimes it's rarely straightforward. All 5, all 1s or all the 2 extremes. So the quality scale is definitely one that we're going to be working on calibrating because it can be very subjective as to what we mean and how we interpret some of those. And then finally, there is going to be at the end of every component, there's something called participant response. So this was an item that was actually added when we revised the curriculum. And what that means, is the children are the participants. And sort of how is that?
It's really designed to give an indication as to what percentage of children are off task, distracted, not paying attention, not focusing, etc. For a certain period of time. And so we'll see specifically in just a few minutes kind of what that indicator looks like. But yes, it's just a way of indicating how much attention or how little attention the children seem to be paying.
Attending to any particular component. And again, in the spirit of transparency, I will say that is an item, and again, it's at the end of every component, that has been sort of a really interesting discussion / debate point in our department, because, again, while it does say more than 75% of the children or less than 75% of the children, we have very robust discussions about, well, is paying attention looking at the teacher? Is it looking out the window? Could it be walking around? All of those, I think, are subjective. And that's one that, I guess I might suggest you all do more conversations about. Okay.
Now, Abby's raising an interesting point right there, and I'm just going to sort of use that to bring in the fact that in addition to the actual Fidelity tool itself, the 44 pages or so of the actual tool where you're doing the observations and checking off the ratings on the various 1 to 5 scales for quality, etc. There is an accompanying manual to the Fidelity tool that provides some clarification around questions or issues that Abby just sort of raised right there. So if you are going through this Fidelity tool, and we might have an opportunity to do this actually in a few moments, and there's a prompt, there is a question, and you're not quite sure, how you should be scoring something, the accompanying manual will most likely be able to provide some clarification for you and give you some guidance as to how you should be thinking about or how you should be considering a particular question or prompt. And I'm not sure, Marissa, that we have shared that manual with you yet, but I will certainly do that ASAP if we don't end up linking it in our presentation today. So
yes. And so also in terms of the way that it's been used in Boston, it's been part of a larger study, a national study by MDRC. So there is, so some of the data points here are very, I guess, research oriented. So we'll point out the ones that, we might say or suggest, well, this is something that MDRC really wanted to capture. It's not necessary, or you might decide whether or not to keep it for your purposes. And also part of the, in order for this to be sort of research valid, we went through a very, we went through a training of everybody needed to be trained on the tool, but then you also needed to pass a reliability test, which you might, your research data friends here might be able to construct, where, you watch, whoever's going to be doing Fidelity would watch a video, make sure that they're calibrated to some of the master codes before they went out and did it. And then also, oftentimes you'd pair with somebody for the first 2 or 3 times to make sure that you and your partner are also reliable. So that feels like a lot of different steps, but I think, and you can decide whether or not that's, the level at which you want to go to. But we did find that did also help validate, and our research people were very much like, that's kind of what you need to make sure that the results that you get are kind of valid. So so that's some of the things that, lessons learned from our end that are probably helpful for you all to think about as well.
So I think
Abby,
we're going to actually start. Go ahead.
Marissa.
I'm sorry. So one of the things I just wanted everyone to hear this comment. We went ahead and used the class alignment with this, and we are all trained, we are all reliable in our department. So we saw a lot of similarities. I didn't want our team to be thinking that we have to be reliable in something else.
Yeah.
So we're hoping that's kind of where we were thinking with that.
Okay. Yeah. No, and I think that there, we have aligned the Fidelity tool to the class tool. So there's definitely correlations. If somebody rates 6 on class, it's likely they're going to be rating similarly with the Fidelity tool. So that, I think that also probably serves well in terms of like a reliability check. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to pretty much follow a template or a kind of a similar protocol for each of the components that we're going to be looking at. We're going to give you a brief description or goals of the component. We're going to look at the tools, look at the items in the tool. So hopefully people have one in front of them.
Yes,
Good.
and I will also be putting this up on the screen, which is why I just stopped sharing momentarily. I'm gonna have this up on the screen for us to refer to as well.
Just so that we have a little bit of discussion as to what the items are and what they mean. Then we will watch a video of a teacher, and then we will give everybody 5 to 10 minutes to score by yourselves. And then we'll all come together and then kind of go through what the master codes are, and hear from people if they score. No one should feel like anybody has anything right or wrong, but that to hear from, I think it's good for folks to hear from others. Well, I gave it this 1, and then to sort of hear the explanation as to why it actually is a 4 and vice versa. Okay, so we find that sort of approach kind of really helps people understand it.
Right.
So
I mean, let's just start actually just from the very beginning of the tool, because I'm not sure that every single one of us here has had a chance necessarily to peruse this, but first page of the tool is quite straightforward, and as you can see, there's room for your name, the room to play, write down where you're doing the observation. The start and the end time certainly is something that you want to keep in mind, and you'll see here that we've got notes for visit 1 and visit 2 that again goes to sort of some of our specific purposes with the research bit that Abby has already alluded to, also to make sure that you're able to see all of the various components that you might want to see in a classroom. We have found that sometimes it's necessary to do more than 1 visit to capture all of the various components of the curriculum.
So we had this sort of set up because many of the components that are typically not observed in the morning, usually you'll have to capture in a second visit. But again, you can decide whether or not you want to do that huge, cover that, or if you can have a person literally stay the whole day, that also captures it as well. There's these 2 questions here about what week they're on, and then what week they're supposed to be on. The supposed to be on is one from the research. So again, I might not necessarily have that as a question. What week of building blocks they're on. Lead teacher and paraprofessional. I know that for many of you, you have, there's a different, you have a variety of different sort of instructional teaming. To be honest, in the district, when we do the tool, we only follow the lead teacher. But in our community programs, because there isn't as much of a delineation between lead teacher and assistant teacher or paraprofessional, we score everybody. We score all the instruction. And I might make a note when we get to a component who did it. There isn't specifically a place there where you indicate it, but I usually do write it down. Who was it that was executing it? But again, that may be something you want to determine, whether you just want to watch a lead teacher, both, or indicate which is which. This is paper. This is another sort of thing that seems like taken for granted. But there have been times when we've discussed whether or not to make this electronic, like using an iPad or something like that. It certainly probably makes it easier to input the data in the end. To be honest, and we'll see this when we go through it, rarely does the observation follow the linear layout of the tool, and you do so much flipping back and forth that I don't know. I guess if I were going to do this electronically, it'd actually probably be more difficult to do electronically than to do a written one, as much as it would probably make our data person happy. But that is also something to consider as well. You record the number of children that are there, other staff, speech therapists, volunteers, etc. Also observing adult storytelling. So a teacher telling about, well, when I was 5 years old, I was doing this. Yes, and again, these are 2 problem stories also. That's what again, for research purposes, they wanted to.
They wanted to get a specific read on these two particular items right here, which is why they're noted. You don't necessarily need to keep these things on the first page when you're using the tool yourselves. You certainly can. Then we've also got space down here for any significant events that may occur during the observation, so for example, if there's a fire drill or, any other sort of a thing that, might be disruptive or that might have an outsized kind of an impact or an effect on the observation that's happening. You would make a note of it right in this particular space. And then we are moving into, again, this page right here that we're looking at on the screen is really specifically around the research piece of things that we have been sort of conducting here in BPS, whether we're doing a double coded visit, whether there's only going to be one observer, that kind of a thing. So you can have that there for reference, but you may not really need to put that into play for your purposes. And then we're going to move down to the first component that the tool looks at, which is our intro to centers. And we are going to walk through all of the items in this component, and we're going to have an opportunity here for any clarifying questions about any of these items, right? We want to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of what these items are asking about, and what these items are expecting us to be sort of looking at and focusing. So if, as we're going through these items, you have any questions about them, either put question in the chat, or you can just kind of call it out popcorn style, and we'll just kind of keep on going. And the very beginning of this is quite straightforward. You've got an opportunity to note when the introduction to centers begins, when the introduction to centers ends, which then will help you determine your answer to question 1 right here, which is asking whether or not the introduction to centers stays within the recommended time frame, which is 8 to 10 minutes.
Around 8 to 10.
Approximately
And
8 to 10
definitely
minutes, yes.
when you do the baseline, you probably want it even shorter than that. So I think it's also important to determine whether or not the take, and this is, we should have talked about this in the beginning a little bit too. So we typically, when we first did this, we did find that taking a baseline, a mid-year, and then an exit one was really helpful in sort of seeing the scope of the curriculum and the project. We, again, for transparency's sake, at this point, we're only able to do 2, baseline and a mid-year, in our community programs, just because, resource-wise, people-wise, it's really difficult to do 3. But that's also to say that maybe you might have a cadre of folks who this might be their full responsibility. I think we had an email recently, I think from Marissa, about what other positions might be helpful in this project. So someone who coordinates Fidelity, or again, like a cadre of folks who are really well trained in it and can do it as you almost need a full-time persons in order to get all of this kind of data. That might be helpful. Let's back up just a little bit too, in terms of intro to centers. So those, if there are any folks that weren't here with us before, this component happens right before centers, and the goal of it is to not be super long. So it's not like a 20-minute circle time, and it really should be setting the stage for the work that children will be doing in the centers that are going to follow. And so that should give you an idea as to why the different quality items are laid out as they are.
And so thinking, therefore, about the start and end time piece of things, oftentimes teachers might sort of do a morning meeting and then sort of the intro to centers, your morning meeting where you might be taking a look out the window to see what the weather is, or singing a, glad to have you here, kind of a welcome song type of a thing, then go right into your intro to centers. Your start time should be when the actual intro to centers itself begins, not those other pieces of morning meeting, but when the teacher begins to describe what the activities and lessons for centers will be. Something to keep in mind right there. So
Q2, teacher names all available centers. So here's where other tools that you might have with you or prior to your observation will be helpful. You can get the teacher's schedule, their lesson plan, the weekly plan, to see what all the available centers are. Quick sweep of the room before you go in, if they name it. And that's a yes, no.
For just another quick point here too, this is a yes/no question, obviously, but it will behoove you to take copious notes as you're going through all of these things. So it's not just check off the yes or check off the no, but write down what the actual centers are that the teacher is mentioning, in the space available here, just for your records, for your information.
Q3, teacher highlights 1 or 2 centers by modeling or demonstrating the planned activities. Again, yes, no. Definitely in the beginning of the year, probably 1 is probably as much as that she might do. Q4 asks questions that guide children to be more deeply and actively engaged on the center activity. So you'll hear why and how questions that she'll be asking them. 5, center specific vocabulary. So if they're, when she's describing the STEM center, experiment, test, record, document, in art, create, in blocks, construct. So you really want to be hearing not just naming materials, but also vocabulary that, again, related to the why and the how, that are really rich and specific to the centers. 6, again, prepared with materials needed for intro to centers with no wait time. So yes, the idea, again, even while this is yes, no. So you'll be able to sort of see that if she's, brings the kids together, but then she's like, oh, wait, all my stuff's in the closet. Hang on, friends. And they're like,
Right.
talk to your friends while I'm gone. So that's a yes, no. Now we're going to get into our quality items. So one thing to know about the yes, no questions is, even though they sort of feel like, sort of, or yes, no, don't worry. I guess I would say don't worry too much, because actually what's going to be more revealing, or more where you're going to have a little more specificity, is in the quality items. So for example, the Q7, where the teacher efficiently brings the class together and signals instructions about to begin. So that will be related to Q6. She's prepared. So yes, if she's prepared, chances are she's going to probably get pretty close to a 3 or above in the efficiently bringing the class together. Again, this is if she spends 5-6 minutes singing the alphabet song or days of the week and things like that. Yes, while the class is coming together, the signal for the instruction may be 6 minutes down the road. So that's why number 3 is she does bring them together, but the process is somewhat disorganized. Some students' focus is not on the teacher. So again, we know that from when we were training earlier, that anything past sort of 6 minutes, you're going to get less and less engagement from the kids. And which is why rating them as a 1 is when she is struggling for, it's probably going to go over the 10 minutes on the adherence part. And then you'll also see that reflected in the quality. So for example, she's struggling to get their attention, multiple attempts, 1, 2, 3 eyes on me. So this is an example of how there's a yes, no with the adherence, but then there's more detail that's going to be shown in the quality item. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So then we're down to Q8 right here, where the teacher is connecting the activities that she's describing to the unit, the theme of the unit, or one of the texts from the unit. And we've got varying degrees to which the teacher might do that. The strongest one here, number 5, the teacher is making an extensive connection, a very clear, very explicit connection between what the activity is and the unit theme or the text. Sort of 3, the teacher is maybe mentioning that we're going to be doing this activity because we read this book yesterday, but the teacher will not sort of go into detail about how or why the activity is connected to what was occurring in the story. And 1 pretty clearly is the teacher simply omits any connections to the unit, the theme, or a text at all.
She may be just naming the centers. You're going to paint with watercolors and art. You're going to be building with blocks and blocks, etc.
Right.
So some of the things you'll hear that will give her a higher score, he or she a higher score, is similar or different. So we'll be making pizzas in the dramatic play. Similar. How is that similar or different to the little red hen in the story that we, again, he or she's going to keep that pretty tight. So it's not going to go off on many, many answers to that, but she'll at least pose that the reason or the context for them doing anything is going to be sort of related to the big ideas or to the read alouds.
Right. And that's the key word really there. She's contextualizing these activities, these lessons for the children. She's providing a frame and a purpose, a reason for why they're doing them. We get to Q9 right here, and it's all about vocabulary. And we're looking at 2 things. It is both the use of some of that sophisticated vocabulary that Abby was mentioning a moment ago, and the number of times that the teacher simply utilizes that high-level vocabulary, but it's also looking at whether or not the teacher provides definitions of those vocabulary words as well. And ideally, we're seeing both of those things happening, right? So you will want to, again, you'll see underneath, it says list the vocabulary words used. Definitely do that. Keep a running record of the vocabulary words that are being used. note down what the definitions are that the teacher is giving, if she is giving any definitions. Yes.
So if you, again, you look back at the adherence ones where it says using center specific vocabulary, that's a yes, no, but then you're also sort of simultaneously also making note of the words used, which ones were defined. Again, something that is helpful to me when I do this is like figuring out if you have, quick notations, like I always star the ones that she did define. I know that sometimes people get, you could say when they're using vocabulary, just the fact that they're speaking is using vocabulary and language, right? But, for me, and calibrating is around, again, the center specific, the unit specific, sort of, yeah, she's saying blocks, but I wouldn't necessarily count that as a vocabulary word. Construct would be one, because that's, again, that has something more specific to do. So you'll just drive yourself crazy, because if you just try to, you're basically gonna, if you counted everything that came out of her mouth as vocabulary, it kind of doesn't, it's not exact, it's not, I think, as accurate as noting the ones that are sort of tier 2 or tier 3 kinds of words.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Oh, actually, that's in Q10.
And Q10 is right where we're going, we're going next, right? So it's a slightly different way of thinking about what we're talking about in Q9. Talking about using a variety of vocabulary words that are sophisticated or advanced at tier 2 or tier 3 words. Again, right down here, and you've got, she uses a variety of them. She uses a few, or she uses basically none down here for a rating of 1, or yes, the vocabulary that she's using is extremely basic in nature.
Yeah, and also to the multiple modalities. So again, when we're talking about vocabulary, I'm sure our speech and language folks and our ELL folks here will probably be appreciative of the fact that it should be also not just, construct means to build, using gestures, using the visuals, asking children maybe she translates. So again, remember back when we were saying how the practices are also in the quality elements. So differentiation is here, because if she's not just defining it by verbal, but also using multiple modalities, she's differentiating as well. Teacher is using, and also the intentionality, right? So sometimes you can hear, again, in the way that she uses the words, you'll construct this, that it's similar to or different from the little red hen when she baked her pizza with her friends. So you'll hear those kinds of markers of intentionality.
And one of the key things that we're looking for here is, to some extent, in this particular indicator, we're not necessarily focusing so much on the number of vocabulary words. So if you look at sort of the rating 1 right here, it says she or he might use many different vocabulary words, but there's little intentionality behind them, right? Mm-hmm. And so in this case, we are again focusing specifically on, is she using these vocabulary words for some specific purposes to kind of push children's thinking forward as much as possible.
Q12 is about incorporating references to prior class work for children to reference. And again, part of why that's important, as we've looked in other trainings, is that helps engage children. It helps them take ownership over of the learning. And so it just makes it stronger for the children to connect to. It's a stronger frame for children when they go to work in centers. And then Q13. Discussion is focused on intro to centers. Again, when we talked about, how is this similar or different to the little red hen, you'll see a teacher deftly sort of stick to maybe 1 or 2 children's responses, but not going on like the bunny trail, which again, will probably make the intro to centers really long and arduous, possibly. So you'll see the veering off topic 1 or 2 times, that's the reason why that's a 3. 1 dominated by child-led monologues or discussion unrelated to center activities. So sometimes that is one where, not necessarily pushback, but sometimes people will be like, well, isn't it good to engage children in these conversations and ask them about how this is relative to them or how this relates to them? Absolutely. This is not to say that those discussions aren't important.
It's a question of where and when specifically. And so what you would want to aim for is having a very brief, perhaps, opportunity for that during intro, but the bulk of that should be occurring during the actual center time itself with the children.
Yes. And then here's this first part where we talked about participant response. During the intro, check off the number of children who are off task, distracted, or unfocused 50% or more of the time. So again, I'm sure our data folks will be like, okay, that's a little bit of a math problem because 50% of most about half of you got to first take the number of kids and the amount of time and do some kind of cross-reference, which again, I usually land.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got say you have, you've got 10 children in your classroom, and 5 of them are rolling around on the carpet for 5 minutes of your 10-minute intro, then you'd say that about half of the children present were distracted for 50% or more of the time. Is really what we're talking about here.
And going back to when we were talking about the data cycle, so you have the collection point, which is here, but the reflection, and when I use this in coaching, I do usually say, yep, that is true. 50% of the kids were distracted, etc. But that's also kind of tied to when I might talk to the teacher about, so when did they start going off track? Probably around minute 10. And that's why the adherence, you got to know for that didn't stay within the time. And you also notice that's when things went off the rails. So that's where the tool helps couch. This is what we saw, but also to help teachers reflect on why and when did that happen. So it's not like you get dinged necessarily for that.
So we're gonna move into watching a video of Intro to Centers, and we're gonna have an opportunity to do some rating of that intro ourselves. As Abby said earlier, hopefully you had an opportunity to print out a copy of this tool yourselves, so that as you are watching the video, you will be able to take some notes in the tool. I would recommend, different folks have different sorts of ways that they kind of approach this. I find it useful sort of as a first pass to try to get down as much as possible in terms of the notes, what is the teacher saying, what language is she using, and then kind of go back and think about where am I actually going to sort of circle in terms of the 5, the 4, the 3, the 2, or the 1. And so that might be something I would encourage you to do. Don't try to sort of give the rating right away as you're watching what's going on, but try again to get down the language that the teacher is using, the things that she's saying, the things that she's doing. And then we will have some time at the end of the video for you then to review your notes and think a little bit more about, okay, she was doing this, so now do I think that means she was at a 3 or a 4, etc. So let me call up that video here for us. The other thing also to just keep in mind is that you will want to be timing this. You'll want to be keeping track of how long this is going on for to answer some of these questions. So if you have an iPhone, a clock, watch, whatever it is, make sure that you've got that ready to go. And here we are. Just bear with me for a minute. That's the one. Okay, let me share this with everybody. I'll stop talking. Say thank goodness, and here we are. Okay.
Today we're going to class words from daily life. Let's start by crafting the syllables in daily life. Hands up. Ready? Stand, be, I, there. Paula, how many syllables are there? was Jennifer the giraffe. Let's do Jennifer. Ready? Jennifer. Now, how many syllables? 4. Let's double check. You think 3 and 4. Let's do it together and double check. Jennifer. How many? 3 syllables. I like 2 more words. She said, Miss Jennifer was so flustered. That means that when she was there, she was like surprised and caught off guard, so she was feeling a little rushed. She was flustered. Let's clap out flustered. Flustered. 2 syllables. Clapping. We're not reading. We're clapping the words. We have one more word to clap. Are you ready? He looked magnificent. Okay, what is magnificent? That's great. Yeah, really great or beautiful or fancy. It's fantastic. Let's clap out. Let's clap out. Magnificent. Ready? Magnificent. 4 syllables in magnificent. Today at the house area, friends, we are going to continue with our beauty shop for Dandelion. There's only one problem with beauty shop, myself. The customers do not know how much to pay. So we really need to make a price list. Like if you get curlers, they cost $2.05 or $2. If you get a braid, it might cost more. What about if you got your hair braided, your hair washed, your hair dried? One knows how to do a braid. Raise your hand if you know how to do a braid. So if you're not sure, now I can help you with the braid. I know Lola can, and I can also help you with how to braid. Right? Oh, yeah. So beauty shop is open.
How about letters?
Are you waiting? You can see a puck from there. Today at the water table, we have a new food to cook with. It is round, Jerry. 1, Michael 2. Fix your body. It is round. It has a skin on it. It's not a tomato. It's something you find in the holiday season. Oh, it looks like a grape, but if you open it up, it's different like a grape. It's much more sour. Give it a C. Oh, plus cherry called up. Cranberry. Cranberry juice, you're right. They use this fruit to make cranberry juice. This is open at the water table. We can pretend it. Oh, hold on. I'll tell you when I open everything. Cranberry is open at the water table. You can pretend to cook with. At the science table by the fish, light blocks are still open. We added some new magnet blocks. You can have lights over there for guys to check. Of course you can, right? We have red. We have red. White. We can make pink, green.
It looks like a dog.
It is. I would call it a dark red. Oh, Michael, wait. Listen to your other choices. Waiting. This pinata is open. We are ready to paint it. Yeah. What? Hair salon in 2 minutes. Painting. Painting the pinata is open. What color are we painting that pinata? Gray. Remember how we figured out how to make the color gray? So it's open today. 2. Yeah, a lot of customers. Air hockey is open.
Because there's lots of customers.
Yeah. 2 bags for air hockey. We have something different open at the writing center. We have some new tools. Maybe we can remember what this tool is called. Let's see, a nice part of him, Virginia. You're right. This is called a pipette or an eyedropper. So do you remember the babies in the NICU said they needed some colorful art? One way to make colorful art is to draw with these markers, lots of lines, and then chew over to the set. Get your pipette, soak up the water, and then put the water onto the marker. It kind of makes the marker bleed or spread out. So look, even where I didn't color starts to become blue. And I can mix colors. More marker, pinch, see the water go up the pipette, and then spread droplets. And then I can even tilt it back and forth to spread the water more. Remember, yeah, they're mixing, they're going together, right? The babies in the NICU wanted colorful art. So when you draw on your filter, your white paper, do lots and lots of colors so that the babies, when they're in their little beds, have something colorful to look at. When they're distracted, the colorful art might distract them. Maybe that's why the nurses wanted it, so the colorful art would distract them so they couldn't notice. Lots of art, so I might be, no one's going to art for the babies, someone go there. All right, if you look clear to where you want to play, please put your hands on your head. Oh, Miss Master's going to call some of you in the hall to work on your faces one at a time. I'll have to find out the same. It's in the spell spot. Oh, is that where it is? All right, hands on your head if you have a plan. Willow, what's your first plan? What's your second plan? That's called. What is that called? Yeah, part of the baby hospital with eyedroppers per head. Matt, what's your plan? You can put that. Eyedroppers. And then what's your second plan? That's called. I can't tell. Cranberries? Or first one? Cranberries. Okay. Michael, what's your first plan? Letter shadows. What's your second plan? If that's called. You have to wait, see if it's there. Hey, listening to Clayton. Clayton, what's your first plan? Oh, big cars aren't open on the road. What's open on the road? Air hockey. What's your second plan? You want to paint the pinata? Would you like to go to Cranberries cooking in the water table? Oh, we have trucks in the center table. Those are kind of cards. Okay, awesome. Okay, get ready. If you want to go play cooking in the water table with cranberries and cinnamon and whisks, great, right? Go ahead, red song first. Would anyone like to join Maya? What? Wait, I didn't call that so soon. If you want to go paint on the easel with holiday colors, okay, hold up, we're coming right now. Easel. Yeah, easel. If you want to go to shadows, see your right table, raise your hand.
Okay, we're going to give you about, I think maybe about 8 minutes or so ish to review your notes and to indicate on your sheets what you think the scores should be for these various items in the Intro to Center section. And then we'll come back and we will discuss. Is everybody all right with that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All righty.
Hi, okay, we're back and I'm just dealing with multiple screens and things as always. Hopefully, you had some opportunity there to organize your notes and organize your thinking about what was going on in the video. I mean, this is a lot. No doubt, and I'm sure that some of you may have felt that. There's a lot going on in the video. There's a lot to be keeping track of. There's a lot to be jotting down and noting. And so it does take some practice to sort of feel as sort of on top of that as you will ultimately want to feel about things. But let's work our way through this, starting from the top. And I think that the best way to actually sort of be thinking about indicating what we gave as scores or ratings is probably going to be to use the chat for this instead of sort of calling out things. So we'll just walk through these and put your answer in the chat box, and we'll sort of get a sense or a read of where people are, and we'll discuss. So question 1, as to whether the intro stayed within the 8 to 10 minute time frame that we're looking for.
So what we'll do is we'll say what the master code is, and if folks are willing, if they get a different answer, they can put in the chat box, and then we'll ask if you're willing to say why you scored it the way you did. Yes. So she does stay just barely within it's around 10 minutes. And so I technically might say that that's a little bit on the long side. So you start timing it after. So in the beginning, if you noticed, she did some sort of phonics work, some foundational literacy work, looking at letters and some words. So that doesn't count as the start of the intro to centers. You started right when she says, here's what we're going to be doing in centers today, friends. You'll usually hear some signal like that. The end time should be counted as once all the children are off of the rug and dismissed into centers. So, because we were looking at a video and the video cut off, I might say that she didn't. I mean, right now, according to the master code, she did just barely, but chances are if you were watching it live, if you were using that as the benchmark, it probably went over 10 minutes. She got a yes for naming all of the centers, a yes for highlighting 1 or 2. For asking questions to guide centers, she got a no, because there wasn't much how or why. There wasn't how or why questions. Center specific vocabulary, yes. Prepared for materials, yes. So let's take just one little moment if anybody had anything different from those. Like I said, for me, the part that might be a little bit different and questioning would be the start and end time, because I think that the whole going child by child by child about what their plan was and what their second plan was made that particularly long. So in a coaching situation, I most likely would suggest that she consider a more efficient or quicker way to dismiss kids into centers. I would probably say, off you go, friends, because whatever it is that their plan is, like on the rug, once they get there, may be completely different. Okay, so let's move on to the quality items. Bringing the class together, she got a 5.
Okay, right, that is yes. Linking the activities to the unit, the theme, or one of the texts from the unit. A 3 for that piece of things. At the beginning, she made a connection between the housekeeping area, the beauty shop that was going to be in the housekeeping area, and the read aloud text, Dandelion. But it wasn't a particularly extensive kind of a connection, didn't really sort of refer to what the beauty shop had to do with Dandelion, why was he going to the beauty shop? Why was he going to the barber in the story, showing the children any of the illustrations from the book, etc. And there really weren't any connections to other texts or connections between the other activities and texts beyond that point.
So another thing that you probably noticed is she described a center where they were going to be caring for NICU babies, which isn't part of the unit, but that's also a place where, which is fine. A teacher, maybe I think I remember that there was a visiting nurse that was sort of coming in as an expert, and she was creating this learning experience for kids to be doing that, which she could have related to the big ideas of this unit, which is friendship. So she could have talked about, even though it's not technically part of the curriculum, if she made a tight tie or at least some kind of context to the big ideas, it might have been stronger. So that's one where it's like, yes, she's technically not following the curriculum, but if she makes an adjustment, if it ties to it, it would give her a higher score.
I did see that Amy had a question or a hand raised. Amy, what's on your mind?
Well, I was thinking about question 7,
Mm-hmm.
and you gave her a 5. And I guess I gave her a 3 simply because I was thinking where they said 90% was focused on the teacher, but it seemed to me that it was just a select number of students that were actually answering the questions for being whatever, and it wasn't, the majority. So I guess that's what threw me off.
Okay, right. Okay, so teacher efficiently brings the full class together and signals that instruction is about to begin. And I mean, in this particular instance, it's a little bit not necessarily tricky, but she moves directly from that foundational literacy work straight into intro to centers. And so there's just a very kind of a minor transition point right there. And the question about, with a majority of children focused on the teacher and her instructions, this is certainly something that we have had conversations about here in the department about how can you really tell whether a child is or is not focused? I mean, in some cases, it might appear to be obvious. You might have a child who's kind of looking this way or looking that way, or maybe crawling around on the carpet, might lead you to think, well, that child is not focused or not paying attention. But, it certainly has been our experience in classrooms and as coaches that even children sometimes who might be crawling around on the floor or who might be looking out the window, they might actually be paying a great deal of attention to what is being discussed and what is happening. And if you were to ask them a question, they might be totally on point and know exactly what you're talking about and give you a clear answer. So the question of sort of what we're sort of trying to gauge in terms of indicators around this focused piece of things, it's a little bit tricky.
Although, Amy, I think you're also asking the idea that it's only a few children that are responding to her questions, or she's only taking responses from just a few and not all of the children. So if you do look at the item, it doesn't necessarily require or ask how many children are being, so it does talk about the focus of more than 90% are focused on the teacher, but it doesn't have a piece in there about how many different children should be asking. But again, that is a place that I might notice, and maybe it would also indicate across multiple whole group components that I've watched. I might say, it's usually these 3 kids who answer your questions. Maybe you want to institute something like equity sticks, where it's like, okay, I'm going to ask these 3 friends, and these 3 friends will have a turn. So that, so technically she doesn't not. I agree with what you're saying, but that's not captured necessarily in this. And it should be noted.
And to kind of just take that just a little bit further, if she were to ask all of the friends at the circle for a response, all 10 or however many kids there were, you would probably end up running into an issue with your timing. piece of things. To get around all of the children, to get a response from each one would be pushing the limits of your 8 to 10 minutes, is another thing to think about as well. Let's go to question 9 right here, where we're talking about vocabulary. And there is a lot of vocabulary, and the question of embedding vocabulary in the language that she was using would be at the 6 or more times piece of things, words such as the price list, curlers, droplet, pipette, whisk, bleed, etc. The definition of the vocabulary, a piece of things, would be a little bit lower, somewhere around the 2 times the piece of things. One thing to note in terms of definition of the vocabulary piece, there were, as Abby had mentioned, sort of when we were looking at this at the outset, the modalities in which those definitions were occurring. She was using at least 2 modalities. She was using a verbal sort of a definition of things when she was talking about bleed, when you're drawing with the marker on the coffee filter and then squirting the water on it, talked about how that meant that the color was spreading out. She used that phrase, spread out. So that was a verbal definition. But she also defined a couple of the things by sort of showing and saying, this is like with the pipette, here is a tool. Do you remember what it's called? This is a pipette. Or with the cranberry, we have this fruit, we have this berry. This thing here is called a cranberry. Thinking about question 10, a variety of vocabulary words that are sophisticated or advanced. A 5 for that piece of things. Right there, our tier 2 or tier 3 vocabulary. The intentionality of those vocabulary words would be more around sort of a 4, possibly a 3. She was using, again, a variety of different vocabulary words, but she didn't necessarily go into sort of as much sort of specificity or make as many connections as she could have right there.
Let's see. Q12, referencing prior work. She gets a 3 for that. The discussion on intro to center, she actually got a 5. But again, part of what I think she gets a 5 for on that is because we're looking at a video rather than the actual live entire piece of it. Because I do think that, again, that long piece at the end where she's asking individual children doesn't include everybody, talking about like what they're going to be doing. And the child response on Q14, which is again the participant response, she got a 1.
Yeah, no, I mean,
none of.
Yeah, I mean, it's really somewhere between the none and the few piece of things right here. I mean, she certainly did have to sort of comment a couple of times to a few children, to kind of pull their attention, their focus back.
But it wasn't for the majority of the time.
Exactly. Lydia is making a note here in the chat around a little bit of difficulty hearing some of the audio in the video. Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Lydia, and apologies for that. Not the most robust audio right there. That does also, though, certainly point towards when you are going to be doing an observation, depending on what the component is that you are trying to observe, there are going to be multiple conversations happening potentially in the classroom, and you are going to need to make sure to situate yourself physically in appropriate proximity to the teacher to make sure that you are able to capture everything that she is saying. Particularly, for example, maybe during center time, when the children are all up, moving around the room, playing together at the same time. The number of conversations, the volume in the classroom can be elevated. And so just making sure that you are, again, situating yourself appropriately to be able to hear as much as you possibly can. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, Marissa, can you say a little bit more about the bias that you noticed?
So she looked like the teacher that we share with in our PDs about the color investigation.
Yeah, she is the same teacher, Marissa.
Yeah, and I loved that video. So I didn't score, but I did mentally make notes, and I'm surprised that she did not have such a higher score.
Yeah. Oh, I understand. You're saying that you had sort of an expectation.
Yes.
That she would have a higher score.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. I'm glad you brought that up, because usually when we do Fidelity, we don't do Fidelity of our own teachers. We swap. We do somebody else's coached classroom, particularly for that reason, right? It's like you don't want your expectations or a prior relationship or et cetera of a teacher to, affect your scoring, right? So, and at the same time too, I guess this is probably a good sort of frame to think about. Any teacher, whether or not you experience them as exemplary or not exemplary, you're looking at one day and one snapshot. They could be having an off day, or this may not be something they're particularly strong at. And which is another reason why you do this tool, is because when you could say, oh, this teacher is amazing and wonderful, I would score them as a 5. But when you really do get down to, oh, wait a minute, she only did define 2 words. That's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but it does really sort of like help capture what actually happened. But yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that affects the way we score when we're doing observations. Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually thinking at this point, Abby, we've actually been together now for about an hour and 25 minutes, which is right about our halfway mark. And I'm thinking that we might want to let folks have just a very quick kind of move yourself around, shake yourself out kind of an opportunity here before we keep going on. So why don't we just take 5 minutes for some self-care, go do what you need to do, get a drink of water, etc. And we will come back and we will move to the next component here. Yeah. Yes. Okay. We'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Hi. Okay. Hopefully everybody got
a nice little stretch,
jumping jacks, or whatever it takes. Yes. We're going to keep on going here, and we're going to move to our next component, which is going to be our literacy small groups. And so I'm going to, back on the screen here, move down slowly so as not to make anybody too seasick here. Sorry, if I'd been thinking I would have done this actually on the break, but just bear with me for a minute. We're going to move down to the small group piece of things. It's going to be page 12 in your guides.
Now, technically, when you're doing this, observation centers would probably logically follow the intro to centers. So just quickly, in the intro to centers, on the items where it says, does she name all the different centers? There's going to be a corresponding spot in the centers piece of it where you'll list all of the centers that she does. We're obviously not going to watch a center one because it's 60 minutes and we couldn't really watch 60 minutes of centers. And also for some of the same reasons that folks mentioned when we watched the other video, the video is definitely limited in terms of being able to see the whole room, hear very carefully what the teacher and the children are saying. One of the reasons why we use video is because we had so many classrooms that we had to do Fidelity in. And obviously, I guess maybe it goes back to some of the best practices and also thinking about the resources that you'll put towards this. Live is obviously a little bit better. Double coded is also better in terms of accuracy. And yes, I mean, video is probably one of the hardest things to do when you're doing Fidelity because you can't get all the nuance. but we will, hopefully the small group video will be a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
So
we're going to walk through the indicators for the small group section here on the tools, starting again at the top with our start and our end times.
So just a quick summary or back to what small groups are in the curriculum.
Let's do that first. Sure.
Let's see. So in focus, there are two different small groups, language and literacy, and a math small group. We're going to be singing language and literacy. In your variety of classrooms, sometimes teachers have a specific time, like a 10 to 15 minute where everybody's in small groups. Sometimes teachers will pull small groups during centers. There will be lessons in the curriculum for both the literacy small groups and the small groups, again, that you would look at, because there'll be questions about whether or not she stayed to the lesson or not. So you might want to familiarize yourself to what the lesson is before you observe it. And so the idea there is that she's going to be working on sort of targeted skills and documenting children's learning. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's look at Q3 here on the screen. You've got a grid that basically allows you to sort of note down the number of children, the start and end times, the names of the activity, for up to 5 different small group configurations. Again, as Abby noted, teachers might structure their small groups in a variety of different ways, having a distinct small group time where multiple small groups can happen during that block, pulling small groups during centers, etc. But this table here will allow you to keep track of and account for some of that variety. If we go to question 4, does each small group lesson stay within the suggested time frame? That's 12 to 20 minute time frame right there. And then we are down to question 5. Are the small groups, and this goes to the sort of variety of structures that could be in place, are the small groups delivered as a standalone component? Are they happening during center time? Are they happening during a small group block? Or are they happening in some other sort of a structure? And you would be able to note down exactly what that structure happens to be. Question 6, the lead teacher is delivering the high support activities and or the medium support activities. The way that small groups are designed to be implemented would be that the lead teacher is responsible for doing the high or medium support activities. The paraprofessional, the assistant teacher, might be doing the medium support activities or supervising the independent small group activities with children.
But again, this would be the place where you could decide whether or not, because in community programs, sometimes they trade off. Lead teacher might be doing the high support with a few kids, and then the assistant teacher might take over and do it with another cycle of kids. So I think it doesn't, as long as you all know what it is you're recording, or if there's a place to indicate this small group was led by the lead teacher, this one was by the paraprofessional. Oh, actually, there will be a place in that in the tool itself. So let's go ahead.
Question 7 is similar to the one from Intro to Centers, and whether or not materials are prepared in advance. Question 8, does the teacher briefly demonstrate, present, explain, introduce what the lesson is all about, the purpose of the lesson, how children are supposed to be engaging with the materials? Question 9, does the teacher use vocabulary words that are connected to a unit text, and then also connected to the small group activity? Question 10 has to do with whether or not the teacher references a unit text right there. So not specifically thinking about the vocabulary, but making reference to, making connection to the unit text. Question 11, if whether or not, if at the end of the smaller group activity, does the teacher summarize, recap for the children what they have just done before releasing the children and moving on to the next activity. Question 12 is asking whether more than 50% of the children have hands-on opportunities with materials for more than 50% of the time. So what we're getting at here is we want children to have as much of a hands-on opportunity as possible, not just have the teacher kind of talking at or presenting information. And so this is just a way of capturing the degree to which children are having an opportunity to manipulate, use, play with, work with materials. We get into the quality piece down here with question 13, asking whether or not the teacher is conducting the activity as it is written in the curriculum, and if the teacher is making any changes, which she or he can do, whether or not those changes are aligned with the goal of the lesson. Okay, and so a 5, you would score that way if you are conducting the lesson as written, or if you are making some adjustments, but you are keeping the objective aligned, all the way down to a 1, where you are either not doing the lesson as written, or you are making a whole lot of changes and you're veering way off track in terms of what the goal is. So, question about the degree of alignment right here with question 14, sort of building out a little bit from where we were in question 13. So how aligned do we believe that activity is? So for a 5 here, the objective is enhanced through whatever the adjustment might be. All the way down to a 1, similarly to the question above, where we are sort of veering somewhat wildly off track or off course. Question 15, basically identical to what we saw in Intro to Centers. How many times the teacher is embedding the vocabulary in the language she is using? How many times is she defining vocabulary that she's using? Here, our scale is a little bit different. It's only looking at sort of 3 or more times as opposed to the 6 or more times in Intro to Centers. Similar question again with question 16 about using a variety of vocabulary words, sophisticated tier 2 or tier 3 words. Similar question again with question 17 about the intentionality of the usage of those vocabulary words. Question 18 is a new one here, where we're talking about the teacher providing accurate information and being flexible in the way that she or he is presenting that information or providing explanations to kind of meet the children where they are in terms of their understanding. Okay, so if we're looking at the rating of 5 right here, whether the teacher can reframe the information to address some misconceptions that a child might have, and still maintain the accuracy of what it is that she is discussing or talking about, all the way down to a 1 where what the teacher is presenting is inaccurate, unclear, kind of muddled, isn't really helping the children to understand things any better, etc. Question 19, we are thinking about teacher kind of building on and extending children's thinking. So taking what the children have said, building off of that, pushing the children's thinking forward, helping to sort of make it clear to the other children what their peer might be discussing or what their peer might be mentioning is talking about right here. If we keep going down to question 20, we're talking about the scaffolding piece of things. So what strategies is the teacher using to scaffold children to extend their learning? And is the teacher providing just enough support so that the child can complete the task, but not sort of being too heavy-handed with the support that's being given? to the children. Question 21, we're talking about making adaptations to the task or the conversation that's happening, again, to sort of meet the children's abilities and where they are developmentally. So thinking about multiple ways of presenting the content, utilizing a variety of materials, giving children some options as to how they want to engage with the task. As it says right here, an example might be that some children are going to be asked to write a story. Other children might be asked to draw a picture and then sort of verbally narrate or describe the story of what's happening in that picture. And then finally, we have our participant response question again, as to how many children are on task for what percentage of time. So we're now going to take a look if we don't have any questions about any of these indicators, and I'll pause just for a minute to see if we do. And I can see Catherine, I think. No, maybe you were just indicating to somebody else there, perhaps, Catherine. See if anybody does have any questions about any of these. We'll just take a quick look through. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions right now. That's fine. We're actually I'm sorry, yes?
No, Candace had to, Candace came all the way down here to tell me how excited she was about the question. Candace, I want you to talk.
Yes, accuracy, sure.
Okay, I put it in the chat. I was trying to be succinct and not hold everything up.
No.
But that is something that we've really not had a way. We've noticed it in classrooms, but there really wasn't a way to address it specifically in any of our, things that we look at, our specific criteria. But any of you all that have been on this team for a while, all I have to say is wheat rice, and you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes teachers don't know what they don't know, and they spread that along to their children.
Yes. No, and I think one of the reasons why it's definitely, you'll actually see this also in the math items around accuracy and precision, specifically for, I'm sure, some of the things that you're thinking about too. So a number of the language and literacy small groups will be experiments that the children are doing, because it'll be kind of connected to the let's find out about it, where they're going to be, so when they're reading Gilberto in the Wind, one of the language and literacy small groups is experimenting with how far they can blow objects across a table using straws. So, yes, it's related to the story, but she'll also have to be providing sort of accurate information as to why that's happening. So we always, in our department, we always call it rhinos, because one time I was in a classroom and I heard a teacher trying to explain what a rhino was, and she explained it as it's sort of like a fat unicorn to a child, and also a second language learner, to which I was like, actually it's not anything like a fat unicorn. And and again, you think, okay, well, that's just sort of interesting or amusing, but for a second language learner to have, or a young child, for that concept to be presented in that way, it's like, actually, no, it's not what it is. So we would call it like rhinos sometimes. But yes, it is another place to, when you're coaching teachers, to talk about the importance of accuracy. And that also relates back to how well prepared she is for the group, being clear what she's conveying to the kids. If she knows that this group of little friends are second language learners, or where they are developmentally, you'll also see that reflected in the scaffolds that she, because accuracy is obviously also is related to the scaffold which she provides for them. So yes, we appreciate that as well. So let's take a look.
What we're going to do first, actually, is we're going to, and I'm going to put this in the chat, we're actually going to take a look at the lesson, itself. And I'm just going to throw that in the chat because, as you saw, some of the questions speak to, whether she's following the lesson, whether she's not following the lesson. So we're going to give folks, the lesson is not very long. We're going to give you just maybe 4 minutes here to review the lesson. You can see it right there in the chat. Then we'll come back and we'll click into the video itself. So open that lesson up, read through it, just orient yourself to what's going on. All right, does anybody need an additional minute to take a look at that lesson? If you do, you can just indicate. Looks like we are okay to move to the video right now. So let me bring that back. And we'll give this a shot. I think that you should find the audio is a little bit better this time around, I hope. So let me bring this up here for us. And remember to have your timing mechanism as well, your watch, your phone, etc. Here we go.
My friends, we have been, manos quieto, please. We have been reading a lot of books about family. We read about Noisy Nora. Remember Noisy Nora who had a baby and all that? And Nora had to wait sometimes when mom was taking care of the baby. And we read about helping baby Louise feel better when she was sad and all the family took care of her. Do you remember that one, Cristal? And then we read about how they love the baby so much. They want to hug the baby and squeeze the baby porque quieren tanto al bebé. And we read this one when the baby wanted more. And do you remember this one? Where the sisters saved, who did they save the baby from? Do you remember? ¿A quién salvaron el bebé? ¿Del qué? Del dragón que quería comer al bebé. Now, all these people, they really loved their babies and their family. And you know, let me share with you again. Look up here. Jamilet said, I love you, Fatima. And she loves her daddy, and she loves Jesus. Who made that picture? Kaylee made it. You know who she said she loved? Sebastián. ¿Sabe quién dijo que se quiere mucho? Kaylee said, I love you, Miss Hernandez. Teresa, who do you love so much? My mommy and my daddy. Your mommy and your daddy? ¿Y Sebastián? I have two mommies. ¿Quién en tu familia quieres mucho? ¿Te quieres mucho a quién? A mi abuela, a mi papá y a mi mamá. A mi tío Jero, a mi tía Luisa. Y tienes a mi papito y a mi mamita. Tienes mucha familia, so you love those people. So ahora vas a dibujar a tu familia. And my friend Cristal, who do you love so much in your family? Doña Milet y Sofía. Oh, ellos son amigos y quieres mucho a tus amigos, pero ¿quién quieres en tu familia? Who do you love in your family? En tu familia. Después mi mamá. Tu mamá, tu hermana. ¿Y quién más vive en tu casa? Mi hermana. Ajá. Yo tengo 2 hermanas. You have 2 sisters? Cuando yo no tenía otra hermana, a la superior. Well, we ready to draw? ¿Estamos listos? Ok, aquí tenemos los marcadores y vamos a dibujar a las personas en nuestra familia que nos queremos mucho. So here's the Liza, Sebastián, y esto dice, I love you. Y vamos a dibujar a la gente de nuestra familia. Oh, sí, está al revés, espera, es así. Ok, hazme un favor, tapa el marcador. Here you go, Cristal, can you reach? Okay. Go ahead. Kaylee, do you remember when you were yesterday and we did that? So think about who are the people that you love so much. Johan, please go ask Miss Anne. Ve y pregunta a Miss Anne, Johan. ¿Qué pasó? You pinch yourself? Okay, put the top. You all right? Nice details. I see. Sí, vamos a dibujar la gente en nuestra familia. ¿Quién es esa persona? Espera, ella me está hablando. ¿Quién es esa persona? A mí. ¿Y quién más en tu familia puedes dibujar? ¿Te quieres mucho a quién en tu familia? A mami. ¿Quién más? ¿Quién es esa persona? Who's that person? Tu papá. Okay. I see, you're going to add eyebrows. Nice details. See, he's adding the details of his family's hair. Oh, did you add the eyebrows to me? Okay. Go ahead. Sí, que tú hiciste a tu papá. ¿Quién más? Okay.
Pues voy a jugar.
¿Se puede? Okay, when you're finished.
Una casa.
You're going to make a house today? Okay. ¿Con los bloques? ¿Y qué más?
Colores.
Okay.
Luego mire.
Okay. Mira, te falta algo. ¿Cómo se llama esto en inglés?
Brazos.
Los brazos. Arms. Arms. Sí, las familias son gente que te quieren, que te cuidan, que te dan mucho cariño y ayuda.
¿Quién me cuida?
¿Quién te cuida?
Mi abuela.
¿Tu abuela? ¿Esa es tu abuela ahí? ¿Is that your
Pero
grandmother?
no tengo espacio para que me haga yo.
Pues you can make you a little smaller here on this side or down
¿Pero
here.
se puede hacer chiquito?
Yeah, you could do it just a little smaller.
Voy a tener cuidado mucho en eso.
We're going to be careful.
Pero yo puedo hacer.
A un círculo, you could make a smaller circle for your face here. Try it. See if you can do it. Yes. There you are. Así estás haciendo muchos detalles. Lots of little details. Me avisa cuando estás. ¿Ya? Ven, pásale conmigo. Maneuver. Sebastián, just echa tu silla para adelante. Scoot your chair up. Thank you. Okay.
No, yo sí puedo pasar.
¿Sí puedes? Okay. So cuéntame, ¿quiénes son esta gente que quieres mucho, que son en tu familia? Who are these people that you love so much?
Mi mamá.
Mi mamá, let's write it.
Yo soy. Yo soy.
Mi mamá, that's me.
Y esta es mi hermana.
¿Cómo se llama tu hermana?
Tania y
Mi hermana, Tania. ¿Quién más?
y Cindy.
¿Quién es Cindy? Esa es Tania. Where's Cindy? Cindy.
Este es Tania.
Ajá.
Y este es mi papá.
Ajá.
Y esta es usted.
¿A mí? Oh. Miss Hernández, un segundito, dale esa. Oh, ¿y quién es esta persona aquí? ¿Usted? ¿Esa es tu mamá? Cindy, a mi papá. ¿Y quién fue usted? Oh, that's you? Okay. Espera, Cristal. Sí, pero no es tu turno. Estoy trabajando con Cristal. Espera un segundito. So you say, I love you, Tania, mi hermana Cindy. I love you, Papi. I love you, Miss Hernandez. And I love you, Mommy. Thank you, Cristal. You can move on. Okay. All right. ¿Estás listo? ¿Sí? Are you ready?
Yo no me bastante con ya.
Okay. Sounds good. ¿Cuántos niños están en bloques? How many friends are in blocks? Count them. Espera un segundito. How many? ¿Cuántos? Pero ¿cuántos hay? How many?
Dos.
You can go.
Es niño.
You can go play with friends. Go. You can go.
No deja. Sí, deja.
Si puedes. You can go. Okay. All right. A ver, so esto dice, I love you, yo te quiero o yo te amo. ¿Y quiénes son esta gente en tu familia?
Soy yo, ese es mi papá,
Okay.
ese de yo.
Oh, espera, al pasito, voy a escribirlo. Okay, so this is your daddy, y tu papá, mi papá, y este, ¿eres tú?
Sí.
Okay, so Sebastián. ¿Y qué tienes ahí en la mano? What are you holding?
Tengo mi mano.
That's your hand, tus dedos, your fingers.
Sí, mis dedos.
Your fingers, okay. ¿Y esta persona quién es?
Esta.
Ya, ajá.
Mamá.
¿Es tu mamá? ¿Y por qué quieres tanto a tu mamá y tu papá?
Sí.
Porque sí, pero ¿por qué?
Mira.
Oh, espera, Natalia.
Ellos me aman a mí.
Enséñaselo al mesero, ¿ok? ¿Por qué qué?
Porque ellos me aman a mí.
Porque te dan mucho cariño y mucho amor. Ajá. So mi mamá, you can go put it to dry over there. Ponlo a que se seca. Ahí. Okay. I love you, mamá, papá y Sebastián. Oh, ¿quién es él?
Yo soy yo siendo bebé.
That's you as a baby? Okay. Yes, that's me. It's a baby. Okay, ¿se sabe escribir tu nombre?
No.
¿Sabes? ¿No? Okay. All right, Sebastián. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Ahora me voy a jugar.
Vas a buscar, otro centro. Okay, dale esa. You got a little brown. That's okay. Oh, wait, on purpose. All right, are you ready? Nice details. All right, so this says, I love you. Who are the people in your family?
Love you.
Yeah, let me show you. I love you.
Okay. A little bit of an abrupt ending. Apologies for that. Let's do what we did before. We'll take about 8 minutes, review your notes, mark what you believe the appropriate ratings are for the various items, and then we will come back together and we will discuss. All right. Hi again. Here we are. Let's bring this back. We'll bring the tool back up on the screen. We'll walk through where we were at. Let's begin at the beginning with the question of timing right here. Close that. Okay, here we are. Excuse me just a moment while I call it back. There we are, our start time and our end time. How many minutes long did we feel? I mean, we're going to sort of skip actually down to question 2 here, just around the timing piece of things. How long did this go for? We clocked it on our end at about 12, somewhere between 11 and 12 minutes, which is close enough to our suggested time frame that we would put that at a yes right there. Going then to our grid, where we've got our number of children, would have been the 3 children right there. Our start time, I mean, from the clock, it was starting at approximately 3:21, ending at approximately 3:33. The name of activity from our lesson, drawing family pictures. It is from our revised curriculum, a focus on pre-K. So for the alignment piece on this table here, we would put NA because there, you know, it was right out of the curriculum, and it was being done by the lead teacher. I mean, we certainly know that on our end, you guys might not have had a real way of assessing that piece of things, but it was the lead teacher in this case.
So Q3, where the small groups are delivered as and check all that apply. So the standalone component would be if you were doing all literacy, all the small groups are literacy small groups from 10 to 10:15 would be, that's what everybody's doing.
Q5, you said Q3, yeah, Q5.
I have a different numbers. It is during centers. And even though, okay, so during centers, which you can sort of discern because she does pause during different times to speak to kids, help manage kids that are in centers. Or the other choice here is during a small group block. And that would be if it were a small, everybody's doing small groups, but some of the small groups are math and some of them are literacy. So the during centers part, that's also where you would, why there's that grid box at the top, because oftentimes teachers may, instead of doing a separate small group time, would be pulling kids during centers. So you would have different start and end times. Like she would, after she did this group, she might go off then and facilitate in centers and then pull another group maybe 10 minutes later. And so that's why the dosage, the start time is the start of the first small groups and the end time is the last small groups. So that time might be 40 minutes because if she's doing it during centers, but then you have more nuance of each individual start and end time for each of the groups that she pulls. Materials are prepared in advance. Yes, not too many materials needed for this one. The teacher makes a brief presentation. She lets them know how they're going to use the materials, as to why they're going to be doing, she refers back to some of the big ideas of the unit, which is the family unit. The vocabulary related to the unit books and the small group activity. Absolutely, you're going to be drawing, labeling your family and all the people in your family. She references the unit book. In fact, a couple of them, Peter's Chair, Unga Bunga. Noisy Nora is not actually Noisy Nora was part of the old OWL, but she also uses that as well. So if there were a piece where she's making an adjustment, it is fully aligned because even though she's using Noisy Nora, it's still, she keeps the integrity of what the objective is. Children having 50% hands-on time, absolutely. Most of the time, the kids were doing the work. Go ahead.
What about the summarizing and reflecting on the lesson before the transition piece of things?
She really doesn't. She sort of lets each child, she reviews with each child sort of what they did. But as a small group, she did say, so today what we did is we drew pictures of our families, just like in Peter's Chair, just like the families that we've been looking at. And so again, it's a nuance, but she let everybody sort of drift off.
Right, now we're into the quality piece of things, right? And we're talking about first bit right here, the teacher conducting the activity as written, and any changes are aligned with the objective, as Abby was just talking about in reference to Noisy Nora. And so we did have a chance to look at the lesson before the video, and one piece in the lesson does speak specifically about referencing the family in Peter's Chair and comparing and contrasting the family in Peter's Chair to the family in Unga Bunga. And so she did not follow that piece of things, 100% exactly as that was articulated in the lesson. But she did maintain the integrity of the lesson, as Abby indicated, with Noisy Nora, etc., right there. And so this would end up scoring, probably right about a 4 piece of things right there, because she did make the adjustment. It was, however, quite aligned with what the goal and the objective of the lesson was. Question 14, in this case, we do not need to worry about. It's not applicable because it was straight out of the curriculum. If we go to the next piece of things, you're thinking about the teacher using embedding vocabulary and language, and it's defining the vocabulary words, certainly embedded the vocabulary in the language that she was using with the children, the various family members, love, talking about caring, etc. So the language was certainly there and present. The definition piece, not quite as much. So whereas the embedding might be 3 or more times, the definition piece is probably more around the 1 time or so. Certainly thinking about the definition of love, what that means, and sort of describing some of that and helping children think about that piece of things. Next question, where we're talking about the vocabulary words being sophisticated or advanced, our tier 2 or our tier 3 vocabulary words. Right here. The teacher was certainly using a variety of vocabulary words, but the sort of sophisticated nature of them was not particularly present. I mean, they were fairly basic vocabulary words: mom, dad, yeah, hug, that piece of things, which is why this would probably be rated closer to sort of a 2 for this particular piece. The intentionality in the next question, whether the teacher is intentional about which vocabulary words were being used and her definitions of those vocabulary words, it's a little bit tricky with the way that this question is constructed, because it is talking about intentionality, but it's also talking about the level of sophistication of those words. So she was certainly intentional about the vocabulary that she was using, which would move her up sort of on our scale right here. But as we already mentioned a moment ago, sort of the words were not, particularly sophisticated. And so that doesn't allow her to sort of get to our top spot 5 right here. And so 4 would be a better rating for this question.
I mean, also at the same time too, this is in the first unit of the curriculum, second language learners. So, it's a little bit also thinking about it in context of, how much sophisticated vocabulary would be warranted in this lesson as well. Building on and extending children's thinking and understanding in flexible ways. There was a little bit of a missed opportunity. There was a little boy in the beginning who said something about he had 2 mommies, and she sort of just went past that. I'm not sure if she didn't hear it. I think that she did do some asking the children to explain sort of, the things that they did with their sister, or, some of the examples of why they love each, the family members that they were naming. Some of the details that they were adding to their drawing, but again, I think it was a little characterized by some missed opportunities. But gives her, I think she a 3, in terms of responsiveness. In terms of the scaffolds in the next item, certainly because she translates quite a bit, she rates a 4 as a scaffold. And also when she asks them for more details, or to look at each other's drawings, you could add eyebrows just like Sebastian did as well, is also another form of scaffold. In terms of adapting the task, I think 4, also again, there wasn't it didn't seem to be an apparent need to do much adapting in terms of using different materials or different modalities. It felt like she had a good understanding of what children's capability was. So some of that adaptation you might see, or an example of a way you could see an adaptation or a scaffold might be if another group of children came over, she might be making higher scaffolds for another group that might need different materials. So for this particular one, she did not make a lot of scaffolds. So here's another piece where you might need to see all of the small groups happen in that grid where they have space for 3 or 4 or 5 small groups. You might take sort of the overall, did she make for all the small groups that she did she make differentiated scaffolds? And participant response based on this group, all the kids were attending to the task. And again, you probably wouldn't be able to make that overall until you saw the entirety or all of the different groups that she met with.
Thank you, Angel, for joining us. Have a great time at your graduation obligation. I hope that is awesome. I'm sure that will be a lot of fun.
Yes.
Yes.
So any questions or different ratings that you want to discuss from the small groups from doing this? I think this this one was easier to hear, but this is also going to be one that's going to be a little bit tricky or toggling back and forth between if you're doing it live, because if she is pulling them during small groups, you might have to zip over to where she is to sort of listen in and seeing what she's doing. And even though we're not doing centers for this one, this is another one where if she's pulling small groups during centers and the majority of the time she's sitting in a small group, conducting small groups, that will bring her down in the facilitation of centers. So she might be doing ACEs in small group, but it may be lower scored for her centers if that's the method that she's doing. Okay. All righty. Good.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have some additional videos that we were, tentatively sort of thinking that we might be able to work through with you for a few more of the components of the curriculum, but sort of looking at the clock and sort of thinking about where we are and what time it is right now, it's probably not going to make sense for us to move into all of those right now with you. We can certainly make those videos available to you and provide some guidance around what our thinking would be for the scoring of those videos. If you would like to kind of take a look and work through those on your own a little bit later.
So what we'll do, we'll share with you this these slides, which should still have the links to the videos. So the ones that are left to do, or the ones that we had that we have in this deck, are a read aloud, a let's find out about it, and a thinking and feedback. So you have the tool, you'll have these videos that you'll kind of do the same. I guess I would recommend doing the same thing that we just did. I might look back in our training videos to kind of just center yourself on what is the goal for the component, go through the different items, and then watch the video and then score separately and come back and calibrate with your peers as to what, and we will also send you the manual that will help you arrive at the master scores. Personally, I think it's a really great idea to have kind of hearty disagreements or discussions around, I always really like it when somebody scores a 1 and somebody scores a 5, because I think that's where the most kind of coming together around a calibrated score really happens. And it's really good to have that kind of conversation. So a couple of things that we want to just draw your attention to that are at the end of the tool. So if we were going to continue to go through this, something that you might notice, and hopefully you will notice when you're going through the tool, is, as we said in the beginning, that there are practices that go throughout all of the components. So in addition to sort of recording whether or not they're doing the lesson as planned, something that you'll see repeatedly are the implicit practices that are in all of the components. So even by just doing the ones that we did, we see that vocabulary is very important, right? Scaffolding, you'll see a scaffolding item in all of the components, whether or not the teacher is doing scaffolds. So that's the differentiation practice. The making connections will be repeated through all of the components. So how close is she tying back to the big ideas, to the read alouds? That's the integration practice. So again, you'll see that throughout. You will often see a teacher, again, like what we were just talking about with Rada, if she were pulling them all during centers, while she may be amazing, her small group scores might be 4s and 5s. If she were pulling them during centers, that would probably lower her facilitation of learning for her center component. So you may have an up and down kind of teacher around that, which is, again, really good. Remember when we were talking about what are the things we want to work on? That would give you an idea as to what your coaching plan or coaching support might be with her, maybe helping her rethink getting her small groups done, but then also not to the detriment of her center facilitation. So at the end of the entire tool, there's a section called global items, and these you'll complete by looking at overall all of the components that you see. And so this is kind of where this kind of captures how well is she doing these practices consistently throughout the entire observation. So yes, you might have her lower in one component, but again, this allows you to sort of see, but when she's doing all of this, she's really consistently using good vocabulary, sophisticated vocabulary. She's consistently doing scaffolds, making connections. She could be stronger in doing it in her Let's Find Out About It. But again, this gives you a much, I think, gestalt, I guess, of what the teacher is doing. Because a lot of times too, when we train this, sometimes, again, going back to when Marissa, you were saying bias, you want to be like, you know what, this is a really great teacher. She's taking this, let's find out about it. But does that negatively, will that bring her score down? And usually what we sort of find is, yeah, you don't have to be doing everything perfectly. But again, this is, if she's doing these practices consistently throughout, what you end up getting is a pretty high scoring teacher.
Right. And I mean, again, thinking about sort of the what the data has demonstrated, it's not a question of needing to necessarily score at our cutoff point for every single component in order to do well. It's scoring at sort of our cutoff point, again, overall globally, that is what matters here. That is the sort of important driver of outcomes with this. I do see that Lydia, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I had a question, Abby, about, you were referring to, that if she was doing great with the small groups, but never was interacting with the children during center time. If we're going to be using this tool over a period of a couple of visits, could we then focus on the learning center facilitation like the next time?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
Okay.
and again, she may this might be, it might be a question of like how she schedules it. So like if I went to go visit her on that Tuesday, that might be the day that she's going to knock off all of her small groups. And so maybe that center time would be lower for facilitation. But if I came the next day, because she would be done with all of her small groups, I'd see a higher facilitation in her centers. So again, thinking about what the context is and why doing 2 visits versus just 1, double coding, will definitely get you a richer look at what the teacher is doing.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
And then the other piece too with the global items, something that you'll see reflected in here, this is also the place where we added items where we wanted to know specific things about our classrooms, particularly around the teachers' cultural and linguistically sustaining practices, how much value of diversity, classroom environment. So here's a place where, again, for your purposes, if there are particular lenses that you want to gauge teachers on, this is the place where you would put that. And again, you know, you would be looking at sort of a gestalt, I guess, of the whole teacher experience, the whole teacher observation. The other part that it's not included in this tool that we're sharing with you, but one that we did use when we originally did Fidelity, is a teacher interview. And again, we had a number of items there where, you know, where they could talk to us about, I mean, one of the things we were interested in is how do you constitute your small groups? And so we would ask them that and they would tell us, and that would give us a good indication as to whether they use documentation and assessment. If they say, oh, I just keep them all in the same group for the whole time, or this group really works well together without a lot of detail as to why, then, you know, that just might be something that you might want to note as well.
That teacher interview can also provide some insight into sort of some nuances of the scheduling. In terms of how teachers schedule the various components, et cetera. It will allow you to dig a little bit deeper into understanding that. Now, I do know, Marissa, you shared with us the draft of your tool, and yes, you do have that interview piece at the end of your tool, which was great to see that you've got that plugged in there already. I'm noticing in the chat that Joyce has a question about the global questions. Can the global questions be broken up into only the sections that you view? And before answering that, I wanted to just ask Joyce if you could just talk a little bit about that, just a little bit more to make sure that I'm understanding exactly what it is that you want to know there.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, I was just curious about if you're only viewing the Learning Center section, or if you're only viewing small group that particular day you go in the classroom. And I see it says global items complete at the end of visit. So you can only, I'm thinking that you can only answer questions that are relevant to what you saw. So that's why I was asking, can you just specifically go into those questions and then come back at another time and do the other questions?
Well, if you looked through the global items, those will be the practices that are going to be opportune in every component. So even if you only see 3 components in your observation, intro to centers, centers, and thinking and feedback, you should still be able to score what you saw. So for example, I only saw intro to centers, and thinking and feedback. For those 3 components, I can still score whether or not across all of those I saw multiple scaffolds, and I would consult what I scored her in for those scaffold items to get my, like if she, out of that, across all of them, she was scoring 4. So I'd give her a 4. If she were 4, 1, 2, I might give her a 2 or a 3 because it wasn't consistent across all of them.
Okay, however, so I'm looking at Q3, for example, and I just see the top portion. I'm looking at your, so if there's a math opportunity there, you did not view math that particular day. So
I get that.
So you still go through and respond to the math question, even though you didn't see it that day.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Because, for example, if you were viewing centers, if she were mathematizing, oh, you would do this first, second, or third, or which shape, blocks were you using? That's a math opportunity, even though you didn't see sort of like, okay, friends, we're going to do a math lesson.
Yeah, and that's the key word, is the opportunity word right here, and taking advantage of those opportunities. Yeah.
Which is why in parentheses it says outside of math lessons and activities. Yeah.
So in that small group, if that teacher that we just watched, if she says, oh, So and so you have four children,
Right.
you have four people in
Right.
your family, then that would be a simple math opportunity that we
Exactly,
could
Marissa.
notice.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
And yeah,
yep.
and if you saw it throughout, like again, you saw only intro to centers and thinking of feedback. If she, again said who's going to go first, second, or third, or you have four people in your family versus Sebastian who has three people. So it's and same thing if literacy, right? So if you observe in the afternoon and you're seeing only the math components or the let's find out about it, the literacy opportunities are still, let's look at this nonfiction book. This is this is an index or a glossary, or how is this similar or different to read aloud? Good vocabulary is also literacy opportunities. So
that is something that we really try to not drill into the teachers. We make known that all of these subject areas are can be covered in a conversation, all these standards. So okay.
Yes. So that's why integration is one of the important instructional practices, and that's why the tool will reflect that. I think one of the best ways to think about this tool is how many opportunities do they take, the teachers, that they, lack of a better term, exploit, right? So it's
capitalize on.
Yeah, capital. Thank you. That's a much better word.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would say in general, a lower scoring teacher to me is characterized by a number of missed opportunities. Right. So if she's not tuned into, hey, you're tying your shoe, how is that like corduroy's overalls? His were unfastened too. Right. A teacher may not be on like that 100% of the time, but if you can see multiple times when they're not taking advantage of that, then that's usually, to me, that's usually what a lower scoring teacher is falling on.
So that makes me think of a teacher that I recently observed, and she had small groups, and her and her assistant, and neither one of them ever got up to go mingle in centers.
Yes.
And each small group that they were doing the same thing. Even though they were doing a math and a literacy small group, which we were happy, but they did the same math activity with the same set of kids for math and the same exact activity. So I'm just trying to picture they would score low on every bit of this.
Yes, because one, you wouldn't see scaffolds, you wouldn't see differentiation or a number of connections that they could be making. So that sort of, again, kind of cookie cutter. So technically adherence, that teacher might be sticking very close to the curriculum, but then when you see the quality items, you don't see that they're making those relevant to each of the kids. And so, that's what I would say is very typical of, like, you can see them marching through it, but it's not like the impact is going to be very low.
I love that comment that you just said, that it's possible they could adhere 100%, and great.
Yes. And for me, again, when you're using this tool and again, working with teachers with it, that's one of the things that I point out. See, the adherence questions, it's like 20 to 80. The adherence ones are fewer than the majority of this is about quality. So if you want, and that should say something to you, teacher friend, is that yes, we want you to be on unit 2, week 4, but with a certain quality.
Right.
So
and oftentimes the adherence point is sort of the starting point with folks. That is where they will begin and sort of enter into the curriculum. And then it's our work as coaches to sort of help them build out from there.
Which is one of the reasons why, and the administrators are not on here, and the teachers, this is a smaller group, but that's something that I notice I keep bringing up in these meetings, is that it's okay to read a different book, and it's okay to do a different activity, because you're still adhering to the objective, but you're not reading the document word for word.
So you'll notice, and again, and this is probably why it's a good thing to use in training. Oh, you'll notice that what you get dinged on, okay, she's using noisy Nora and that's not in the curriculum. That's literally one little item, but there's so many other items around the quality that for, you don't get the perfect score, but it's so much, less. So you can give up the fact that you're not doing the lesson as written, and it's such a small consequence versus like the higher quality is the higher stake that you want to lay into.
So I have another question, because one of the things I don't ever want this tool to become, and I feel like our whole team feels like this is not to score high, because my thought is this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's no possible way that a teacher can score high in every domain throughout the whole day.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you call out the fact that those 4 practices are throughout all of them, then that I feel like is the more like when I train a teacher. That's why I'd say, so if we see how to differentiate in centers and small groups, if you can get that down, because that is not required, but because that is so present in every component, then you're going to do amazing. Do you know what I mean? So that's sort of another piece that I would say to a teacher. And I think partly when you all gather all of this is going to be part of what's going to help them understand, and for yourself to understand about the project, right? So you might see, as we do consistently, let's find out about it is a component that is usually the not observed, right? You don't actually get lower score for having a component not be observed. You just don't get a score for it. But when you lay out all of the data, if you see, we rarely see math small groups. That might be a question of like, when are we scheduling these visits? Do teachers usually do it at the end of the day? That might be something to think about as a group. Do we want to ask teachers to maybe schedule it during the morning, or are they happening? Like, what's happening here? So that's another piece to some of those both questions and reflections that you'll get once you get like data across all of your programs. You might see that in your community classrooms, you're seeing more components than in your district classrooms. And you might scratch your head and say, why is that? Or vice versa.
And also thinking about sort of using this tool to set realistic goals over the course of a span of time, over the course of a school year for teachers. The realistic goal would not, sort of, as you're saying, Marissa, be that, as a teacher, you need to be scoring at 5s on all of these points, but, you take a look at that baseline, in the fall, figure out where we're starting and say, okay, so, let's talk about sort of what a reasonable percentage of improvement might be across X number of months. And as long as you are seeing movement towards, that, is valuable.
I think also too, when I think about, again, how to craft my coaching work with a teacher, that baseline is really important, because I might say, oh, well, your ACEs on centers and thinking and feedback, I wasn't seeing as much in your intro in your small groups. So when I come back for your mid assessment, if time is an issue, I may just assess the components that were low.
Right.
So it's like, oh, okay, then the chances of me seeing a 5 again are probably pretty good, and also because I know what I've been seeing across the year. So I may, when I do Fidelity, just say I'm just going to do the parts that were challenging for you to get that piece of it. And also, 70% fidelity to the curriculum is the number that we found to be most impactful on the child outcomes. I guess that's the other part to sort of see too for you all, is you got to see this Fidelity tool in correlation to whatever child outcome tools or assessments that you're doing.
But again, keeping in mind that 70% is overall.
Overall.
That's
yes.
not 70% in
of read alouds, of yes.
In each and every component. And that's a worthwhile distinction to keep in mind, right there.
But again, you'll see what correlation or what number seems to be the turnkey for you all, and that's why you got to look at Fidelity in comparison to child outcomes as well, right? Because then you can also articulate to teachers what number, what practices seem to be the most impactful. I mean, which is why vocabulary is one of the things that we pull out, is like, to emphasize, because teachers who score high on the vocabulary items, their kids seem to score really high on their vocabulary assessments. So you make that correlation as to, this is why we want to do this, because this is what it kind of the outcome that's needed. And again, just finally, what we were saying about realistic or achievable outcomes for teachers as well. If you start with a teacher who kind of scores at like a 30 at your baseline, it's reasonable to say 15 to 20% of an improvement, maybe to mid-year, is reasonable. It becomes a little bit daunting if you want to say 70 is like 70 or 85 is like what we all want to do, and that can be kind of discouraging for a teacher who gets her first baseline at like a 30. But at the same time too, it's like I've definitely seen teachers who are kind of like, all right, I'm a 30, I know exactly what a 70 entails.
Let's
go.
You should, I mean, realistically, you should be seeing this as a multi-year project as well. I mean, certainly talk about, I mean, in terms of the implementation of the curriculum, the first year is really just teachers getting their feet on the ground and wrapping their heads around this stuff. And it's the second year where it really sort of starts to come alive in a more in-depth, in a more meaningful kind of a way. So having that at least a 2-year kind of a horizon and perspective on this is going to be important to keep in mind.
I'm sure the data people here will probably say that as well, that's the data set you kind of want to see across a more longitudinal. And then also I would correlate some of your data findings. Let that also drive your professional development, because, for example, again, if we are seeing the correlation between high vocabulary teachers, high child vocabulary outcomes, I might be like, yeah, let's keep doing that. If I'm not seeing a lot of math, I might say, I think we need to bump up our math PD, right? So, and also I think that when you get your first, data set, what we have found really helpful is when you identify, oh, this is a teacher that's a number 5, and let's find out about it. I would go and film that teacher so that you can use that teacher. You can start banking your training videos for exactly the same kind of thing. And, or leverage those teachers for your PD to maybe help train other teachers. So that's also another good use of, your data set. Yeah. Kind of at the end of for this one, I realized this was a lot to take in. Fidelity is very nuanced. It's very comprehensive, but it really is, like, again, if you can see this as for the multi-levels and uses that you can, it's going to be really exciting stuff for and a very important tool to a lot of this transformative teaching.
Yeah, lots of levels and dimensions to this, from the logistical to the analytical to the planning piece, etc. So I'm going to stop the recording now. I think that we can manage to do that.